Hello, my metaphysical mutts. I'm gonna go with that one this week.
I like that one.
Yeah, yeah, it's like I don't know. It'll make sense, I guess, for
It
this
does. It
this
does. It makes
episode.
perfect
Yeah.
sense. I like it. Well done.
Thank you. I am Devin Shepherd.
And I'm David B. Jacobs.
And we are cadaver dogs. David, it is just the two of us today. Unfortunately, no guests, but I am excited to just like be back here with you and like go balls deep. We did so much research for this one.
We did. I love that I thought this was a Research Light episode. I was like, oh, we lost our guest, so we need to quickly do something. Let's do this Research Light. Oh, I guess it's not Research Light. I guess there's actually a lot going on. Okay. Now I'm
I
going to
know.
all this research between the October festivities.
At the time of recording, we're a couple weeks away from Halloween, which my party supplies just came in today. I'm so excited. Just wait.
Yep.
Sabathon's going to be fucking killer
Awesome.
this year.
We are releasing just 2 days after Halloween, so I feel like it's still appropriate to say Happy Halloween.
Yeah,
So,
happy
Happy Halloween!
Halloween. Wow. What a year for us. It's a great holiday. I love this holiday.
Also this month, my cousins actually just opened a bar in Brooklyn called Medusa. So,
Oh,
after,
sick.
I was doing the Brooklyn Horror stuff last night, and then after that, I just, decided to go in there. I'm like, I'm going to either surprise my cousin, or I'm going to find out that the bar is closed. And it was both. They had already closed, but also my cousin was still there, so then we went bar hopping. And what happened, I wanted to tell you about this. So, at this other bar, I ran into a prop master who I had known years ago, and she's like, "Oh, David." I'm like, "Oh my god, so good to see you." And she's like, "Yeah, I thought you would be like too wholesome to go to a place like this."
What?
And I'm just like, we're at a bar. Like, it's just a bar." And I just do I need to like reinvent my entire image, Devin?
Oh, wait, that was it? There's no, like and then exotic dancers came out? I thought there was gonna be,
No,
like,
I'm just
another
like
shoe.
no, that's isn't that enough? I'm like, what does that mean? I'm trying to figure out what that means.
I think she just doesn't know you well enough. I'm like, "Wait, I'm so what? You can't be at a bar?"
I'm like, but what about me comes off as wholesome? Why would someone think I'm wholesome? I'm not wholesome. She didn't say it in like
Oh
an
my god.
insulting way or anything. Like, she wasn't trying to offend me, but I'm just like, what?
You know what it is, David? You're just too good at your job that it's like, "No, there's nothing else this guy does but watches movies, is on set, and, like, takes his job respectfully." I don't know. What?
But do I need to like change my vibe? Do I need to like make sure that I'm not giving off wholesome vibes? Like, is that actually my problem? And like, I
I
just found
don't
out that that's my problem.
I mean, I know you too well that, like, to me, you don't give off wholesome vibes, but, like, also, like, you don't need to change yourself. People just, like, should try to get to know you instead of making quick judgments of, like, "Hey, this dude that's literally wearing a horror t-shirt right now
Yeah, I am.
is wholesome." I
I'm
don't
wearing
know.
a shirt where it's Shelley Duvall and she's on the Tonight Show, and the guy is coming out to introduce Johnny Carson. He's going, "Here's Johnny," and then Shelley Duvall is freaking out, like holding up a knife, like that one shot in The Shining.
It's such a good shirt. We got that at New Jersey Horror Con, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one day I was at a concert with our friend JR, and I like just took off my coat, and then he just bursts into laughter, and I'm just like, what's funny? And he just goes, "Your shirt." I, I like didn't even remember I was wearing it. But that was definitely like the best reaction I've ever had to a shirt.
Yeah, it's the reaction that we all want to the clothing that we wear. Oh, I love it. Well, wholesome David, I think,
Ah.
we are talking about not so wholesome things today, so maybe the prop master will listen to this show and change her mind about everything, or maybe you proved it to her last night.
Just by being at a bar shatters that image of me.
How dare you drink?
Well, I wasn't drinking because I was driving.
Oh, well, there you go. Anyway, today we have 2 ghost stories coming at you guys. They're both classic films that I hope that you have seen, and if not, you're probably gonna enjoy this conversation anyway.
Very Halloween appropriate.
Very Halloween appropriate. I mean, we all know that spooky season lasts all year long, so
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, Happy new spooky season. It's past November 1st, so obviously spooky season has already begun.
This is just like the time that you're curled up on the couch with your candles and a good blanket watching, like I honestly watching these movies really brought me into the autumnal mood, like, so
Yeah, it really
perfect.
does. It's really great.
Right? Ah.
These are great Halloween movies. Do you wanna kick us off with our first one?
Miss Giddens loves children. That's enough for the owner of Bly Manor to hire Giddens as a governess to his niece and nephew while he stays in town. Miss Giddens travels to Bly Manor in the country and meets Flora, the niece. Giddens is instantly taken with the young girl and enjoys the company of the housekeeper, Mrs. Gross. But the idyllic life at the manor is disrupted when Flora's older brother, Miles, is expelled from school for bad behavior. At first, Miss Giddens finds Miles charming and mature, thinking the expulsion to be a mistake, but soon finds the boy's odd behavior influences Flora, and Miss Giddens becomes disillusioned from their loving relationship that she has formed with the two children. However, it's the story of the children's history that starts to really shake Giddens to her core. Before her, there was another governess, Miss Jessel, and the uncle's valet, Peter Quint. The two of them had a romantic relationship until they both died on the property. Giddens begins to see Quint and Jessel around the grounds of the manor, or rather, she sees what she believes to be their ghosts. And Miss Giddens forms a theory that the ghosts have come back to possess Flora and Miles. In fact, she is sure of it and is determined to save the children from the possession. Giddens' theories, or delusions, throw Flora into a fit, and Giddens sends her away to her uncle in London. Miles, however, stays with Giddens, but is worse than ever before. Giddens must free him of the possession at last, and when we come to the last scene, Giddens begs Miles to say Quint's name and release him of the hold that he has over him. When Miles finally shouts his name, he screams and falls to the ground. Miss Giddens holds the child's lifeless body, and we are left to wonder, was any of this real? This is The Innocents, directed by Jack Clayton, written by William Archibald Truman Capote, and based on the book The Turn of the Screw by Henry James.
So this movie, which is a wonderful movie, opens on an image of Miss Giddens praying. It's focused especially on her hands. And in general, there's just a lot of religious imagery throughout the movie. Do you make anything of that? Do you think that religion plays a role in this story?
First of all, that opening image I was just blown away by. It seemed like such a modern image in such an old film. We had originally chosen this film because we wanted to talk about classic ghost stories. And, ghost stories are very, very old. They are not a new invention. In fact, there are ghosts in the Bible. We see young Flora praying. She's saying her, "If I should die before I wake."
Take my soul, the Lord to take, and
Yeah, whatever that prayer is
if
called.
my I'm trying to remember from a Metallica song.
I love it. But anyway, she's doing the Lord's, I think it's just the Lord's Prayer. And she and Miss Giddens go into a conversation about this, and Flora, like, strikes up this question about heaven and hell and how it works. And she says, if people are not good and they don't get into heaven, because this idea is that people are good and they get into heaven, then are they stuck to roam the earth forever? And in that sense is like says that, like, ghosts then are not necessarily all good people. And I think that idea and the questioning of that idea of good versus evil, specifically through religion, is something that we see throughout the film. Once we start to learn more about the ghosts and who they were in their lives, we see this trickle of, like, okay, are they sinners or are they saints? And did they belong in
Mm.
heaven, or are they actually damned to walk the earth?
Yeah. Also worth noting that they are named, I mean, he's Peter Quint, like Saint Peter, and Miss Jessel, we just see on the tombstone that her first name was Mary, which is also obviously specifically a Christian biblical name. Where are there ghosts in the Bible? I might try to remember it now. It might just be in the Christian part of the Bible. I'm
Yeah,
because I know
it's
the Jewish
probably
part better.
just. Are there ghosts in the Jewish faith?
It depends on who you ask.
Hmm.
It does feel like ghosts tend to have a lot of Christian symbolism. Even in the beginning of this movie, when Miss Giddens first enters the mansion, there is a specific frame that you can pause on when she is passing, so that her head is highlighted by the circular window like a halo, and she is putting her hands together at that exact moment, only at that exact moment. So it's just like, is that the Virgin Mary that that references?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I thought. So
Yeah. Well, and to hold on that, because that's so interesting. So Miss Giddens, who we aren't given a first name, in fact, I think in the book she doesn't have a name at all, and this film actually names her Giddens.
oh, really?
Yeah, she kinda holds this place of, like, a representation of what, I guess, is the question, a representation of a pious woman, of an innocent woman, possibly? Hmm, yes, I don't know.
Mm.
But overall, like, yeah, a good woman, one would say a saintly woman, which then that image of Mary would make sense, or at least the image of the halo around her as she is holding her hands together would make a lot of sense. And going
Yes.
back to your question of, like, the first image that we have of her is her praying, it holds that idea of, like, this is a good woman because she is a good Christian woman, she prays, but at the same time that image holds such a fear that she does seem terrified or scared in that image. And so there is this in that very first image, this debate of good versus evil.
That makes sense. It's weird because we don't really know anything about Miss Giddens.
Yeah.
Like, just really love children is basically all we get. We have no backstory, we don't know her past things, like, I think in Haunting of Bly Manor is also a looser adaptation of this, and in that one, I think she did get a first name and a last name, and in that one, she has a lot more backstory, and they, like, start by giving her entire resume, if I remember correctly. It's been a few years since I watched that, but this movie has none of that. We don't know anything about this person. We don't know what she was doing before she came to Bly Manor. We don't know like anything about her childhood, anything about any other people who she's ever met.
Right. We know a few things, but very, very few. One of them being that she did grow up in a household that was not privileged like the household that Flora and Miles has, right?
Yes, that is true.
She grew up in a house where, like, they didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of things that Miles and Flora does. It was a little more of a cramped space, or at least not as open as Bly Manor, which Bly
Mm,
Manor, of course, is very spacious. But at the same time, through I mean, it literally is just a sentence, but also like the way that she interacts with other people, specifically Mrs. Gross, we see the difference in possibly where she was in the society at the time. She's learned how to read. She
oh yeah.
obviously is single. She is a little bit older. I believe Deborah Kerr was is that how you say it? Deborah Kerr?
Car.
Carr? Carr. Deborah
Yes.
Carr.
Surprise pronunciation.
I know. Oh, Scottish. She was in her mid to late 30s, I think, when she was filming this. And so while the character in the book was in her 20s, it does give this sense that she is this, as much as I don't want to use this word spinster.
Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. Which kind of leads a little naturally into the next thing that I want to, and this is legitimately like I'm actually asking because I'm not sure either way. Do you think this movie has a queer reading around Miss Giddens? Obviously, Haunting of Bly Manor, she was explicitly queer, but in this movie, it's not clear to me. Like, I think I went into this expecting more of a queer read, but I'm not sure if it's there. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I came into this, like, from the Bly Manor show, and I was like, "Oh, wait. No, she actually does not seem queer coded in this at all." To me.
I wouldn't say at all. I'd say it's not definitive, but I mean, even just for that era, the idea of a spinstress woman who is 40 years old, it's like, oh my God, you're 40 and you're not married. Wow, you must be gay. Like,
Yeah. I mean, especially with how much they talk about how beautiful she is, right?
yeah, which I mean, obviously that's silly. Someone can be 40 and single and straight, but in that era, that was like a bit of coding in itself.
Yeah, no, and we're gonna talk about this a lot with our next film as well, but it's hard to like look back at these and be like, oh, single woman, obviously queer or possibly queer, because like I also want to look back at this with like a feminist lens as well,
Yes.
which is like, well, why can't she live her life the way that she wants to live it? And that doesn't necessarily mean that she's gay. It just means that like, okay, maybe she just doesn't want to get married, or maybe she like just isn't interested in that lifestyle. It's not binary, right? It's not either like
Yeah.
you're straight and married or you're gay and not married, like, there's so many different things that you can be in between.
We don't even know for sure. She was never married.
That's true. We don't have anything about her. In fact, it's to me, I was wondering this, she wears black so much throughout the film that who's to say that she
Mm.
herself is not in mourning for something?
Hmm. That's interesting. I think when we first see her, she's wearing white, right? But then she like sort of
Yes.
transitions into black throughout the film.
Yeah, I didn't notice it until the very end, and I was like, "Wait." she keeps wearing all black. Why is she wearing all black? But the other person that we see wearing all black is the ghost of Miss Jessel.
which feels very intentional that when she's wearing black, it becomes to me more of a parallel with Miss Jessel, which is weird. I mean, both of them are. Miss Jessel was obviously not queer coded at all because she was having an active sexual relationship with Peter Quint, who was the chauffeur, right?
Yeah, they call him a valet,
Oh, valet,
chauffeur. I think
valet.
I think
Okay.
it's, like, all the
I
same.
think it's the same thing. I'm not sure. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not. But what would be the parallel between Giddens and Jessel then? Because she does not seem to agree with Miss Jessel's sexual activeness. That Giddens seems like horrified to learn this. Which, to be fair, Jessel and Quint were having sex all over the house, like without closing any doors. They tell us this a lot more explicitly than I expected, by the way, for 1961. So, like, yeah, it is definitely like an issue that the kids could just walk in and see them having sex, like, pretty easily. At the same time, Giddens' reaction is not just like, "Oh, that's weird, and did the kids ever walk in on them?" It is just, like, absolute horror, like, "Oh my god, how
Yeah.
could they have sex? Why would they have sex?" That's so it almost reads me to be to, like, maybe an asexual reading of her.
It could be. It is very apparent that she is a sexually repressed woman.
Yes.
But I think even beyond just her reaction to the Quentin Jessel story, I mean, even in the children themselves, one reading that I had of this film was she's coming in during this time of like kind of like a very key moment of coming of age for these kids.
Mm.
Miles, he does tend to say some very vulgar things, and we can assume that he has said these things also at school, which is why he ended up being expelled. But he's also like, I don't know, what is he like 11, 12? Like during this time where like you're coming out of this innocent age and coming into your body's changing, you're coming into adult, you're having these weird thoughts and you're trying to cope with them, right? And he's a child whose father is not there. His father died when he was younger. His uncle is not there. He's in town. And the only man that he had to look up to was Quint. And we know that they had a very close relationship. And Quint was obviously a very sexual person during that time. So coming back to Miss Giddens, she doesn't like this about Miles. She really, really pushes this. Anything that he does that is sexual or him like trying to figure out what sex could be, she is abhorred by it, right? And I think that through that we can see that she is repressed and kind of like overall thinks of, especially as a child as young as Miles, having these thoughts or experimenting in the way that he does is sinful.
Yep, that is very accurate, I think. I mean, to be fair, Miles is also like a total fucking brat.
Yes.
Like that kid's an asshole and
Do you blame him? Like, look at his life.
yeah, I don't fully blame him. At a certain point you've got to like, okay, step it back a bit, kid. But in addition to all this stuff, he was the one who discovered Quint's body,
Yeah,
which is horrifying and traumatizing. And Miss Giddens keeps trying to rationalize these changes in Miles and in Flora as well. And she talks about like maybe Quint and Jessel are trying to possess them, but also like maybe they're just grief stricken and they've never had to experience grief before. I think they were very, very young when their parents died. So they are acting out because they're upset in
right.
very reasonable and rational ways. And maybe just burying Quentin Jessel and never speaking their name isn't necessarily the healthiest way to help these kids process their grief. Maybe they just need therapy.
Definitely. I mean, when Flora finally breaks down and loses it at a moment, it was after Giddens is like, "Flora, Jessel is there. You see her. Like, why don't you see her?" And this poor child who, had grown what I'm assuming would be a motherly relationship with Jessel before this,
Yeah.
because she was, other than Mrs. Gross, the only woman in her life.
They do talk about Flora and Jessel having an extremely close relationship in the same way, in a similar way.
There you go. Yeah. And so when Jessel dies, I'm sure that heavily affected Flora. And for someone to be like, "Hey, Flora, no, she's actually here." like, she didn't die, and all the grief and trauma that you went through recovering from her death or trying to recover from her death actually is false. Like, no wonder the fucking girl cracked, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so like Giddens is like it's funny because as much as she cares about children and as much as she like wants to care for these children, the way that she reacts to the possibility of them being possessed and the ghosts in the house, she is making these children so much worse. Exactly what they don't need, you know?
It's like whatever happened to her idea of like we should tell the parish. And it's like, yeah, I mean that sounds like a reasonable way to go about it. Okay, no, I can do this myself. I just need to get them to say their names. Like, what? Where'd you get that from?
Okay, that was one issue I had. I was like, "Where the fuck did that come from?" She is selfish in that sense, which is really interesting to think about in terms of like, okay, which characters get punished? And if we're looking at the classic horror trope of like those who are sinful are the ones who get punished in horror movies. Obviously, Quint and Jessel were being, quote, sinful by being sexual with one another.
Mhm.
Um, but Giddens does have a terrible time. I feel like she is punished. Maybe it is that reason of like her selfishness.
It's a very odd movie in how that art comes about. Like the way that Giddens is reading this is that Quint and Jessel were a very bad influence on these kids, and that they are now carrying that bad influence with them, and that it needs to be squashed out.
Yes,
The way we're saying is that it could also just be that they're experiencing grief, which is pretty natural and normal. Of course, it could also be something in between. It could be both of those things together. But like there is also this idea that Giddens is enforcing that kids cannot be corrupted, that they must remain innocent, and we must protect the children. Won't someone please think of the children? That whole meme.
but children are people and they're allowed to change and they're allowed to feel and allowed to have these
Yes.
emotions. And
And they're
yeah,
allowed to
it's
grow up.
exactly. It's weird to hold them on this pedestal. And I feel like when we first see the ghost throughout the home, it's Quint. It's Quint is the first ghost that
Mhm.
we see. And we normally see him through like window panes and almost as much as if it's like a reflection.
Ooh.
What do you see in that motif of Quint appearing? Like, did you get a read of that?
So there is one idea that I had where when she's describing Peter Quint, Mrs. Gross asks like, "Was he handsome?" And then the way that Kins reacts like, "Yes, he was handsome. He was," and then she says it was like it was horrible how handsome he was, something like that. It's a very odd line that almost like if you want to go back to the idea of Giddens being sexually repressed as opposed to just asexual, that there is a sexuality that she is repressing, then it could also feed into that she is horrified of the idea that she might be attracted to Quint.
Totally.
Maybe.
I totally agree. And I feel like the fact that Quint's face is first appearing in the glass of the window panes, or does he appear in a mirror at one point? I can't recall.
I don't think so, but the window panes act like a mirror as well.
Specifically, locking myself onto the word reflection here, as window panes do tend to reflect. Thus, what does the ghost reflect in Miss Kittens? Other than like, yeah, it could be that repressed sexuality coming forward. And to me, with that, she is also seeing it in the children. Again, why is the film called Innocence? Perhaps Giddens sees herself as an innocent, as she does young children as innocents. And as they start to uncover their emotions and their sexuality, maybe she sees that happening within herself. And thus the children are also a reflection upon what is happening with her.
So off that, I hate to bring it back to Bly Manor again, but Bly Manor is really fucking good, and you should all totally watch it. Hey, there's a new Mike Flanagan show out right now. I've got to watch that tonight. In Bly Manor, they very much play into this idea of possession as sexualization and as ownership. That they talk about like the difference between love and possessing, that you can't really love something that you possess, that you're just trying to own it to control it. And then of course Giddens' idea of what's happening is that Quint and Jessel are possessing Miles and Flora. So
Hmm.
if you take this idea of possession as sexualization, which I think still plays even in this movie, that it is you are literally inside of them. You get some uncomfortable reads with that.
Yeah, tell me more, David. Where are you going with that one?
Well, when Quint was alive, we talk about how he and Miles were extremely close to the point where Mrs. Gross seems a bit uncomfortable with how close Quint and Miles were. That Miles would attach himself to Quint, they would always be together. And you can definitely read this as there being an inappropriate pedophilic relationship there. And that pedophilic relationship continues after death, with Quint now inside of Miles, with Jessel inside of Flora. You can
Sure.
even take that the next step. You have two adult lovers possessing two children siblings, and just what's the end game there? This feels incestual.
Yeah, yeah, to summarize David's point here, it's a pedophilic incestual movie is what you're
It's yeah,
saying.
Rob would love this movie.
He would love it.
Rob loves incest in his movies. He'll be so upset that he missed this episode.
I think it's a read. I think it's a read. It's not one that I agree with, though I do see why there are points like, your points make sense, and I don't know if that's do you actually believe this theory, or is this one that, like, you are posing
I
as a
actually
devil's
do believe
advocate?
this theory. I think that this
Interesting.
one makes a lot of sense to me. I think that it helps to explain more of why Miss Giddens is so distraught by their relationship if she is also recognizing the pedophilic nature of it. Like, even if necessarily Quint maybe didn't act on it, I think that it is very possible there was something inappropriate about their relationship.
Yeah, again, I think it's interesting. I don't necessarily subscribe to it because I see more of the relationship between Miles and Quint being a fatherly one, and because I more subscribe to this as a coming of age film. It's hard with these old movies because just the way that our society views things is different.
That's true.
Like the kiss is weird. The kiss between Miles and Miss Giddens is weird, but that's also like our modern lens looking at
Which
it.
kiss? There's two kisses.
There's 2 kisses. I mean, both of them are weird.
The director fought to keep in the kiss at the end of the movie. That the studio wanted to take it out. They were like, "That's kind of odd," and director was like, "No, no, no, that's staying in the movie. That's important."
Yeah, but I think it's also, like, maybe we are taking it too literal then. I think that's something that the theory that you put forth does is, like, it does take it at its face value where, like, if we look at it more in a sense of imagery, like the kiss in a sense of imagery, like what else can that represent? Closeness, acceptance. One of the things could be, sexuality and pedophilia, sure, but I think like there's something deeper there that I want to believe that it represents.
Mhm. When I was watching the movie, I wasn't even thinking about this. I was thinking about the Quentin Miles pedophile relationship, but like I saw that first kiss between them as Miles kisses Miss Giddens, and she's like, "What the fuck? Why did you do that?" And then the second one as that more motherly son, although it's a little weird that she kisses him on his lips. And then hearing that the director had to fight to keep it in made me think, oh no, maybe people in this era, maybe this wasn't as normalized as I was assuming it was back then,
Yeah.
which opens up more of these floodgates, which I feel like our listeners are probably catching on to, that there's also a read that Miss Giddens has some pedophilic attractions.
Yeah.
And all of this also makes sense because these are kids without like actual guardians in their lives. That their parents are gone. Their uncle, who's supposed to be taking care of them, is nowhere to be seen. He's in the first scene of the
Yeah.
movie, and then he's gone for the rest. Like when Miles says, "My uncle doesn't care about us," like he's right. His uncle's not there. He's not in the movie,
Yeah, he's not.
and it leaves them open and vulnerable for this complete stranger who we know nothing about to come in and take advantage of them.
Totally fair, totally fair. And obviously, as we've said before, like she's sexually repressed and maybe she is repressing a pedophilic notion, you know? But also, like, I don't really find it that weird that Miles kisses her at first. Like, he is somebody who, again, he's a child, like, growing into sexuality, has no idea what this is, has no one there telling him what this is because everyone who is a grown up relationship in his life has died. He goes to an all boys school. Miss Giddens is the only woman, I'm assuming the only woman that he like sees that's not an old lady like Mrs. Gross. He probably is attracted to her. The weird side is then, yeah, her returning the kiss at the end.
Yeah, I think it's not questionable that Miles is attracted to her, and I think that's completely normal for an 11-year-old boy. Well, the question is whether she's returning it, and the kiss at the end, I think, is the greater evidence of that. But there's also more. I mean, even just like the way that she ushers everyone at the house, she's like, I have to be alone with Miles this weekend.
That's
All
cute.
of you have to leave so that I can be alone with Miles and help cure him of his possession. It's like, what are you doing? Like, that's so odd. She is also, like, weirdly lenient with them at times, like, there's the classroom scene when both kids are making a fuss, and she, like, kind of brushes it under the rug and is like, "Oh, let's play hide and seek. We can stay up a little bit longer while we play this game." It's all, like, she is there's no one there to control her, there's no one there to reel her in,
Mhm.
and, like, it makes sense to me that someone would resist this theory, especially because of other adaptations where she's a more likable character, but in this one, it was almost odd to me to see her so unravelly, I guess, that there
Sure.
is so much less control on her. She is not as sympathetic as I expected. I've seen this movie before, but, like, years and years ago. So, I was somewhat watching it with fresh eyes. Like, I didn't remember a lot, I didn't remember how it ended, and I didn't remember how unclear our sympathy toward her is, that I you can
Yeah.
you don't have to be sympathetic to her. Even, like, the fact that she's wearing black, the fact that she's wearing that she's mirroring Miss Jessel, the fact that she is mirroring Peter Quint in that image that you just explained. Even that opening image that we said where she mirrors the Virgin Mary, the halo, the window that's shaped like a halo has, like, a spider web pattern in it. So, is she the
Mm.
butterfly or is she the spider? Even just the way that she says, "I just really love children." The way that she says it is
Yeah.
weird.
It's it's definitely creepy, and I think it changes the story completely.
It
Something that
does.
I did learn I have not read the original book. Have you read the
Neither
original
have I.
book story?
It's really short, apparently. It's only, like, 120 pages. It's a novella.
Yeah, I think it was published in like one of those literary magazines at first. So I want to read it now.
Same.
Something that I learned actually was so Truman Capote came on to this
Mm.
film to write it, and I believe the other person who's credited for the screenplay actually is credited because he did a stage adaptation first of The Innocents and then came on to
Oh.
do the film, and then Truman Capote came on to make it more cinematic, I guess. But apparently all the sexual undertones came more when Capote came on.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think that's any surprise. So, from that, I don't think that these themes of sexuality are as prominent in the story. Uncertain, but that's at least, like, a read that I've seen out there,
Is the pedophilia read?
is that's Capote's
Oh,
edition.
gotcha. That
Yeah.
makes sense. But regardless of whose edition it is, if it's in the movie, it's in the movie, even if it's
It's
not
in
in
the
other
movie, yeah,
adaptations. You can read as different. I mean, I definitely am not gonna read Haunting of Bly Manor this way. I don't think Haunting of Bly Manor has this at all, but I think this movie does.
totally. Well, I mean, I don't agree, but yes, yes, yeah, I think it's a valid read. Well, I'm gonna close out this pedophilia discussion.
Sorry.
we we were
Oh,
like,
man.
yeah, we'll touch on that," and then it became much more of a discussion than we had realized.
Oh,
But
no,
it's
I knew it
interesting.
was. Bob is gonna be so mad he missed this episode. He's gonna be like, "Man, you guys were talking about incest and pedophilia?"
Sorry,
Oh, man.
Rob. Yeah, but before we move on to our next film, I know that you have some exciting news that you wanted to share.
Oh, yes. So my short film, Pillow Talk, is it's finishing up its festival run soon. So maybe the last chance to catch it will be at Yonkers Film Festival in like a week after this airs. So we will be screening on Saturday, November 11th at 6 p.m. at Yonkers Film Festival. I don't, at time of recording, have more information than that, but I'm sure that when this releases, there will be more information and we'll put it on social media. So if anyone is in the area and wants to watch my 5-minute short film that I don't think is about incest and pedophilia, but you can read it however you like, then you can come on over to Yonkers and check that out.
Yeah, and we talked about this film a little bit on the pod before, but it's a really great movie, and hopefully soon it'll be more widely available for everybody who isn't in New York or the tri-state area. But
And that information will definitely give you guys as well. If you keep following us on social media, we're at Cadaver Dogs Pod on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, the links to this will be in description as well.
Yeah, and actually, I think this is a good place to say I've also been doing TikToks for us, so we are also on
Ah,
TikTok.
right! I forgot that exists because I'm not on TikTok at all. So thank you for doing that, Devin. Because I did not wanna deal with TikTok. Not to say to you guys that we're judging you listeners who do have TikToks, like, great for you. I barely use my Instagram even, like, I'm really bad at social media.
Meanwhile, I'm, like, overly obsessed with TikTok and really need to stop. But it's fine because it's been great because I get to make TikToks for the pod.
I'm overly obsessed with Reddit.
David is our Redditor. But yeah, if you wanna watch any, like, I don't know, horror memes is basically what I've been doing on there, horror meme videos, and also wrapping up what we had watched for the month, also clipping some of our current episodes that maybe you did not get a chance to listen to. Catch us there on TikTok at Cadaver Dogs Pod. Cool. Well, thank you for letting us plug our shit. And that's what podcasts are for, right?
Yep, sure is.
The next film we have for you is also coming at us from the 1960s. David, why don't you intro this film?
Hill House was built some 90 odd, very odd years ago by Hugh Crane for his wife. However, both his wife and later his second wife died within its gates. His daughter Abigail inherited the house and stayed there till her old age when she died calling for her companion, a companion who then herself inherited Hill House, despite accusations of murdering her benefactor, and later hanged herself from the old rickety spiral staircase in the library. Is this a curious coincidence of sequential deaths? Or is it true what they say, that the dead are not quiet in Hill House, that whoever walks there walks alone? Eleanor is a quiet woman. For the past 11 years, she's become caretaker to her mother, but her mother has now died, and Eleanor finds herself without a place, without a home, when she is contacted by one Dr. Markaway. Markaway wishes to study Hill House to prove scientifically that it is in fact haunted. In addition to Eleanor or Nell, who witnessed a poltergeist as a child, we also have Theodora, an alleged medium, joining them at Hill House. Rounding out our cast of four is Luke, a distant relative of the Cranes, who is set to inherit the house next, and wants very much to remind us all that ghosts do not exist. There are, of course, practical explanations for the house's oddities. Angles are all slightly off, making hallways confusing and maze-like, and allowing mere gravity to slam doors shut on their own. That cold spot outside the nursery where Abigail Crane died is obviously just a draft. And what of the strange noises that Nell and Theo hear at night? Like something large is stomping around, pounding on the doors, trying to get in. Sometimes the wood itself warps as an unseen presence pushes against it. Despite these horrors, Nell has also fallen in love with Hill House. She says that she never wants to leave here. But when Dr. Markaway's wife, Grace, who came to take him away from this nonsense, disappears from the nursery, Nell becomes increasingly unpredictable. She claims that Grace has taken her place in the house and should have been her Nell instead. She ascends that rickety staircase in a trance. When Dr. Markaway drags her down, he puts her in a car to send her home. But instead, Nell drives recklessly through the garden until she crashes, her bitter end. With Nell gone, Grace reemerges, not entirely sure how she got out here, but none are still questioning the haunting of Hill House. This is 1963's The Haunting, directed by Robert Wise, screenplay by Nelson Gidding, adapted from Shirley Jackson's novel The Haunting of Hill House.
Had to end it on the Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House. Ba-da-ba.
The Haunting of Hill House. Roll credits. I also said house a lot in that summary, but it's kind of just unavoidable.
Oh, yeah, bro, it's a house. It's a house. Um
And a house is not a home.
Oh, that's actually something that I wanna talk about later.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so this movie's based off of the book, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson.
Mike Flanagan adapted this one as well.
Yes, we just happened to cover both of these. It's funny because they really wanted to change the title of the book for this movie, and I would argue that, like, a good possible title could have also been The Haunting of Eleanor. Because even though all of these people are in this house, it really does, as Nell has puts it, the house is coming after her and wants her. So I wanted to ask you, David, why you thought that she was more connected to this haunting than anybody else in the room.
So there is a theory, which I'm definitely not the first person to come up with this theory, but I didn't think to look up what other people have said about it. I'm sure that others have said the same thing. That Nell seems to be either a descendant of or a reincarnation of the caretaker who hanged herself from the staircase. In my summary, I called her a companion because I rewatched the opening of the movie and they call her a companion, which is interesting, and we
Yeah.
can come back to that. We will definitely come back to
Oh.
that.
Mm,
But
okay.
regardless, there are a lot of similarities, especially since I rewatched that opening. Aside from just the physical resemblance, they are both caretakers for some older woman. The
Mhm.
one who's never given a name, who took care of Abigail as she died, and then Nell, who took care of her mother in her final decade. And both of the older women died while calling for the younger one. That we talk about this. Nell I mean, they talk about this in the movie that when Nell's mother died, she was ringing to call Nell to come and help her, that something was wrong and she needed help. And Nell just went back to sleep and ignored it one time, and then her mother
Mhm.
died. And she is also accused of, like, you murdered your mother, or you didn't murder your mother. I promise it's okay. It's like, I think Theo's the one who says that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, "You didn't murder your mother," because Theo can read minds or sense things about people, so she
Yeah.
kind of understands that Nell is afraid that she killed her mom, and there may even be there's some tension with Nell and her sister, so maybe her sister also thinks that, and then we also hear that Abigail Crane's companion was also accused of murdering her almost intentionally, which may or may not be true. It's probably not true. The rumor is that she was hooking up with a man at the same time, and that's why she didn't hear Abigail calling. Like, taking care of an older person is a lot of responsibility, and the fact that you can't just let something slide one time is like a whole fear in itself. But
Yeah.
regardless, it's the same fucking story. Nell's backstory is the backstory of that woman, and then we're told they have a resemblance. Like, yeah, I'm totally down with her being like a reincarnation or whatever.
Yeah. For me, my answer is like that and then some, whereas like just like going off of what you said, more than that they were basically doing the same thing and were the same people and look alike. The other thing that I see here and thinking about specifically the time that this film was made and the time that the book was written, which I believe is 1961, it was only a few years earlier. Both of these women are living this life where they're living a life for someone else, right? Their whole entire life is
Mm.
revolved around another being. That's the caretaker aspect of it, right? And the one time that they do something for themselves, the one time that they want something else is when they are punished. And so looking at Nell specifically and why she's targeted, she's living this repressed life. She's living with her sister now after her mom has passed. She's living on the couch in her sister's living room. Like she has nothing of her own and she hasn't ever had anything of her own. She described her past life as like my mom would never let me do anything. So the one time when she's first reached out about Hill House, she's excited about it. It's something that is hers and hers alone and something that she gets to experience. She's so happy that she gets her own room. I mean, she gets angry when she has to bunk with Theo because she's like, "No, I finally had a space of my own," you know? And she finds herself wanting more out of life. She wants to feel independent. And I can see and you can see how this is like punishment as the film goes on, right? Specifically looking at the 1960s being the early onset of the second wave feminism, where women are finding independence. And I think that is very clear through Nell's character. And the reason why the reason why the house targets her, I guess to go back to the question, is like we're watching a woman debate over this traditionalist lifestyle of being a caretaker, of being a repressed woman in society versus like discovering that she has wants for herself, that she is now able to, like, maybe have a little bit of independence.
I will also say that it is emblematic in Theo's character as well, I think, in a different way. That while Nell is repressed and is forced to live someone else's life, Theo represents what she could have. That Theo is a more liberated woman. She just
Yes.
says her roommate, which we'll talk about queer coding later, obviously. But Theo is very grounded. She is very matter of fact. She speaks her mind. She is not afraid to speak her mind, and
Yeah.
there is no they are like polar opposites, and they are drawn to each other. There is an intense friendship between Nell and Theo that they like immediately start calling each other by nicknames and blah blah blah.
Fun fact, so Theo's wardrobe was designed by Mary Quant. Mary Quant is actually one of the women that, like, basically started the mod movement in fashion, which was,
Oh,
like,
cool.
very much a part of the women's liberation movement.
I love that name.
Right? Mary Quant. She was one of the women to basically introduce miniskirts into society. So very liberating. But I do wanna talk about the other women in this film. So Theo is obviously a modern woman. So why do you think that Theo wasn't targeted then?
So there's a weird thing because I think there is a disconnect between what Nell believes the house represents and what it actually represents. That Nell sees the house as something that is just her. She sees it as a place where she belongs. But if we're making this analogy with her and the unnamed companion of Abigail Crane,
Mm.
then Hill House isn't really that. It's still a place where this potential past life was subservient to another person. She is not the reincarnation of Abigail Crane. She is the reincarnation of this outsider who was brought into Hill House and then stayed there forever. That she is still just stepping through the same movements where she lives the rest of her life there until she kills herself. Like it's not actually liberating.
No, it's not. I'm still, like, processing, like, I think these themes are very clear, but I feel like this film is more about a debate rather than, like, a full resolution of
Mm.
the liberation movement. Like,
What do you
it's
think it's
there's
debating?
still about whether or not, it's right to move forward in the world in terms of modernism and liberation, and I think it shows, like, the hard time that women are having with letting go of, maybe, and I think this is something that I see today too, is, like, some women want to have that life of having a home to take care of and a person to take care of, but also, like, wanna support that, like, they have that option, you know? It's a complicated feeling when you're like, "Yes, women 1000% deserve independence, but I also, like, I would like the opportunity to raise children because that's just what I want to do, but I wanna have that option," you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in modern feminism, I think it's more about women being allowed to choose what they want, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And men being able to choose that as well.
1000%. Yeah, and I think that was less so during the '60s. I feel like there was this
Yes.
pressure to no, like, getting married is not feminist,
Yep.
which is actually interesting, and I have one more point before we move on to queer coding, I swear. Or, like, I have one more point and then a question, but, yeah, when Theo's talking about her home back home and Nell asks, "Are you married?" Theo makes a very clear statement that, no, she is not married. So, yeah, I think that's another hint towards Theo being a modern feminist.
And a lesbian.
We'll get there. We'll get there. One question I wanna ask before we get there. There's another woman in the well, there's 2 other women in this film, 3, 4,
Yes.
but there's another prominent woman in this film who is Grace, the doctor's
Good
wife.
point.
What do you take of her presence in the film?
So the thing, Nell also has a apparent love or what she thinks is love for Dr. Markaway, I think. And
Totally.
she's gravitating toward a married man, toward an unavailable man.
She doesn't know. She doesn't know.
We know she doesn't know. But regardless, Nell kind of represents this floaty, superstitious philosophies that he's really interested in studying, whereas Grace is completely no nonsense, practical, grounded. Like, why are you interested in haunted houses? That's so weird. Come back home, please. This is stupid. And I wouldn't call Grace anti-feminist necessarily. I don't think so at all. She feels like a strong, capable woman who is controlling her husband, not even in a controlling way. I don't mean that in a bad way.
You don't argue with Grace, as Luke says. You do not
Yes, you
argue with
don't
Grace,
argue with
yes.
Grace.
She's traditionalist, is how
Yes.
I would describe her.
She is the wife who is in control of the household and wants the husband to stop doing all of this stupid stuff on the side and to come back home and, like, just be a fucking man already.
Yeah.
But then she also winds up being convinced that the house is haunted by the end of the movie.
In a really intense way, in a very quick way. I mean, she faces this thing head on. So I guess the 3 different women then, like, show a way to approach the upcoming modern wave or the upcoming generation and how things are changing in the future. Nell being, like, very timid to approach it. Theo being very confident and taking it full on as totally adopting it as her way of life. And then Grace kind of totally rejecting it and then getting basically hit in the head with it. Like, there's no avoiding that this thing is coming for them at any point.
So do you think that the house with this read literally represents second wave feminism? I mean, this is early on second wave feminism. Like, I think the book would even be completely before it. Although obviously all of the things that lead into second wave feminism are in place throughout all of this. That the 50s is still a time of, like, repressed housewives. People, we look back at the 50s now and are like, wow, being a woman in the 50s sucked.
Well, a couple things to hit on second wave feminism. Like, yes, it's early, but it's not before. Like, this is still like it was
Okay.
very much a discussion during this time. I mean, part of it also brought on by the first contraceptive being available, which
Oh,
originally came on the market as a pill for menstrual issues in like 1957, I believe, but became widely available and marketed as a contraceptive in 1961. So I think a lot of conversations were changing specifically around that, especially around single women during that time.
cool.
Thank you. I found that really cool. I was like, "Oh, this makes sense why feminism became such a big deal." But going on to what the house represents, again, I feel like I'm back and forth in this area because to me, the house like kind of is Hugh Crane, right? And Hugh Crane is very much an older way of thinking, a more traditional lifestyle,
Yeah.
the 1950s lifestyle. Like this house is a home and women must obey the man of the house. Lust is a sin. So like no, but at the same time, I guess maybe it's just about confronting. Maybe the symbolism is just, like, confronting the past.
I actually really like what you just said, that with Hugh Crane being this traditional manly man, that the house could actually represent the traditional gender roles that
Mhm.
Nell thinks it is her liberation, but it is actually just the same bullshit that she's been stuck with.
Yeah.
Theo is not targeted by it, but she is aware of it. She recognizes everything that's going on and manages to escape it by just saying fuck that. And Grace walks head into it, challenges it, and gets spat out and obliterated by it. Nell falls for the lies. Theo sees the lies for what they are, and Grace is oblivious to it and is harmed as a result
Yeah.
of the traditional way of viewing genders.
Yeah. I agree.
And that's why I think the final line aside from narration of the movie is when Luke, who this like give me goosebumps because he's the one who's been like ghosts aren't real the whole time. Then he just looks at
Yeah.
the house and goes, "It's got to be burned down." So if you look at the house as traditional gender roles and it has
Mm.
to be burned down, then yo, we got to do this fucking feminist shit right the fuck now.
Ooh, I love that. Ooh, I love that.
And it's a man who says it. The man who was resisting it, who didn't want to believe that there was any problem at all, who was dead set on this is the way, and is now like, I was fucking wrong.
I love it. I love it. Okay, let's end that there, and now we can talk about queer coding.
Oh my god. So we've said how this movie can represent the new wave of feminists who are rejecting traditional roles. One way you may reject traditional roles is for women to have sex with other women instead of with men. And there is a lot of that in this movie. It is very subtle, a little bit subtle. It's not that subtle. It's pretty obvious. We can agree that Theo is very, very queer coded, right?
Yes, I would agree that she's queer coded, yes.
Shirley Jackson doesn't like that, apparently.
Yeah. Which is funny because, like, I thought it was more obvious in the book than it was in the film, and in the film, it's pretty strong.
I've read the book, but it's been a while, so I don't remember. But just looking at other people seem to think that it is either more explicit in the movie or it is equally subtle slash explicit in the movie
Yeah,
and the book. Obviously, later adaptations got increasingly more explicit. The 1999 one references pretty obviously that she's, I think, bi in that one. And then the
yeah,
Mike Flanagan Haunting of Hill House, she is just openly gay completely, and there is
yeah.
no question about it at all. Predominantly, people have read Theo as gay. That is not a revolutionary read. And if you're one of those people who like gets really mad at arguments about queer coding and you're getting mad that we're saying that Theo is queer coded, then you're wrong.
I do wanna play devil's advocate, and I'm just playing devil's advocate in this
Okay.
sense for the sake of the conversation, but if the author themselves is saying that she's not, I do wanna explore what that would be like, because like, how as I said before, and as we were talking about before, that Theo is, like, the representation of a fully modern woman. I think the things that queer code Theo are the fact that, like, we don't know who she's living with, but she's living with somebody. She says "we," so it seems like that she's in a relationship. We just don't know who that is. We know that she's not married. So, yes, that could be hinting at, like, oh, she, like, lives with a woman who is or in a relationship with a woman, but it could also be that, okay, she's not married, she's living with a man, but can't say that she's living with a man because that's against the morals of the time.
Yeah, she doesn't describe it as relationship, she just says her roommate. Her sis My roommate and I are on the outs at the moment. We're in an off period, and it's like it's kind of a weird thing to talk about with a roommate.
Yeah. But she also says "we," like, she "we's" them. So, like, I feel like it's a relationship, right? I mean, but yeah,
It's
there's
yeah,
enough doubt there that we're not sure, which is why it's queer coding, right? Like, and that's just one example,
yes.
but it's of course never explicit. She is very affectionate with Nell.
We also do have to say that at this period of cinema, there was a lot of censorship, which
Yes.
I think we want to talk about in a future episode more in detail. But to summarize, there was the Hays Code, and you couldn't be gay on screen. Just flat out, you can't be gay on screen. The censors actually told them before they shot the movie that they shouldn't have Nell and Theo touch at any point, and Robert Wise said, "Yeah, fuck that," and just let them touch.
They touch a lot,
They
but
touch a
maybe
lot.
that's part of the story of this film, right? Is that because they are so affectionate towards one another in this movie and we see women being well, I don't necessarily see their relationship as fully positive because Jesus Christ, now you need to stop screaming at every second. I have problems with her. But she does not treat Theo nicely, but Theo does, they support each other and it's nice to see on screen, but definitely not something that we don't see two women embracing as much as they do during this time as much as they
Yes.
do in this film. And so, like, maybe the ideas of when this film first came out, seeing that was more queer coded than it possibly is now. I don't know, but that it just perpetuated that story.
It very much reads to me that Theo is flirting with Nell, and then
Yeah,
Nell also has a line when she is angry at Theo, when she calls her an unnatural woman.
yeah.
And for me, I do not know what else that could mean.
I mean, Theo has ESP. Like, that would
Oh,
be the
yeah,
other
that's true,
thing.
she
It's like
does.
yeah, and which is it's a paranormal ability, which could be a sign of the devil. Being Carrie fans, I'm sure we know what that looks like. Which another odd parallel to Carrie is that Nell's house gets stoned and Carrie's house in the book gets stoned.
Mm. When you're talking about stoning houses and queer coding, there's a whole conversation there that I hadn't thought of until this moment.
Oh, that's interesting. And Nell doesn't have a father figure.
Yeah, none that's mentioned, I don't think.
No, and I don't
So
remember if it's mentioned in the book at all.
this leads us to, and I think this one's a little bit more open to interpretation. You're just playing at devil's advocate. You still think Theo is queer coded,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yes. Do you think Nell is queer coded? Because I
I was
think
gonna
this one's
ask you
more
the same
complicated.
thing. Yeah. No, I don't. I
Oh,
think that,
really?
like, she definitely is repressed on her sexuality. I think, like, it's something that she was never necessarily able to explore, but she very clearly is attracted to the doctor, and is interested in him. I don't see her necessarily returning anything towards Theo. Theo's the only other woman that she, like, basically has a relationship with in the film, so that's why I would use her relationship with Theo as an example. No, I see Nell more as like a woman very much coming of age or coming into her own rather than I see her as someone who's exploring their sexuality with a person of the same gender. I think she's more just exploring sexuality, period.
I disagree.
Great.
I know, this is great. Great. Now we can just reasonably both represent both arguments. Perfect.
Perfect.
I do think that Nell returns Theo's affections to some extent. I think that unlike Theo, who is probably a bit more open about her sexuality and more aware of her sexuality, I think Nell is very much closeted and in denial about any queerness, which might be that she's gay, might be that she's bi. The man that she latches onto is an unavailable man, but both Theo and Luke are flirting with her, and she very much does not go into Luke's flirtations at all. But Theo, like when things are banging at the walls, her reaction is not to ask Theo for help, but to run into Theo's room, into Theo's bed, and like hug her close and embrace her. And to me, this is saying that like there is something there. Like obviously that can be something that just friends do, but I don't think that's what the movie is getting at.
I mean, Nell is very innocent. She's childlike. She, like, doesn't know how to control her emotions. She lashes out. She, like, cries. She kind of acts like a child, and, running into someone else's room because they're scared is very much a childish thing. That's how I read that, as, like, she just isn't mature enough to, like, have a handle on this stuff yet. Like, she isn't the person like Theo is or like Luke is. And
Exactly.
also, she doesn't have like, Luke and Theo can try to flirt with her, but that doesn't mean that she has to give in. Like, Luke's kind of annoying.
Oh, yeah, Luke kinda sucks.
Yeah.
But with her being childlike, exactly, she has not yet embraced her sexuality, and part of this, she has to run away from everything, she has to isolate herself, and there is a repression there because she has not accepted how she actually feels, because she is still figuring out what she wants, and I
Yeah.
think it that there's a part of her that just wants Theo. Not even Theo specifically, but just a woman that she, like, looks up
Mm.
to and respects Theo. She sees Theo's lifestyle as something that she would like for herself, that she wants that so much.
Yes. I agree with all of that, like, minus the queer part of it. Like, I think you can still show somebody exploring their and discovering their sexuality and discovering what they want and, like, admiring another woman without their necessarily them being queer. It could be either, and you're right, like, she could be bi, but to me, like, specifically because of how she interacts with the doctor, I think pushes me more away from the queer coding side. But I agree that all those things of what she wants and what she's exploring are there, just minus the queer aspect of it.
But even if she doesn't know that the doctor is married, he's still, like, not returning those affections at all. That it makes
Isn't he
sense to
though?
me that there's totally a thing when you latch on to people who will never return that, because it's just, like, kind of a way of avoiding your sexuality without having to admit that you're avoiding your sexuality.
Mm.
And, like, that is how I read that. I don't think she actually loves him the way that she claims she does. I think that she is just latching on to the idea of a potentially stable relationship that will make her normal.
Or just she's latching on to the idea of him at all. Like, I think he
Mhm.
does, like, he shows her an affection that she has not had, right? Like, she's been with her mother who I mean, in the book, we get more of an idea of how badly her mother treated her, which was, like, really bad, and then we also see a little
Mm.
bit of Nell's home life with her sister. It's not a good relationship at all, her being in her sister's home. They
Yeah, not
they
at all.
are not very close, yeah. So, it makes sense to me that, like, someone who shows her a little bit of affection or at least has these conversations and respects her theories and her thoughts, that she starts to like them. It's the first person. Like, she's allowed to explore what those feelings mean because she hasn't necessarily, that we know of, had them before.
Well, he's assigning her feelings to supernatural things instead of just saying, "Hey, have you considered that you might, like, be gay?"
Well, I mean her feelings towards him though. She's like, she obviously has affection towards him and she's debating with herself whether or not it is attraction or, if it is just like a friendship.
Yeah, I think that he's basically enabling her to remain repressed. He even admits it at some point. He's like, I should have gotten you out of the house sooner. This house is not good for you. It is kind of fucking you up, and you're doing a massive downward spiral of, I think, regressing even further and believing that this house is where you belong. I mean, I guess it depends on whether or not you believe that she does belong there. I don't know. Did you say that whether or not you think she belongs there?
No, I didn't answer that. I mean, she wants to belong there, so why not? She belongs there because she wants to. She deserves
Cool.
that.
Yeah, I don't think I feel comfortable saying that she belongs there because what that means is her basically killing herself. So, like, the final line of the movie is it's Nell narrating, and in the beginning, they say the famous line from the book, whoever walked there walked alone. And then Nell says it again, but changed it to, we who walk here walk alone.
Mhm.
And it's sad, like, she has gotten what she has says that she wanted, that she will be in Hill House forever, but she will forever be alone.
Yeah. I mean, and if we go back to the theory of if the house represents traditional values, then that kind of works where it's like, okay, if you want to live this family life and be a caretaker and have a home and have a husband, like, sucks for you. The rest of us are going to be out here wearing Mary Quant clothing and going antique shopping with our lesbian lovers, and that's just the life that you're missing out on, man. You're going to be alone.
And it also works with the queer reading
Oh yeah.
because she is not accepting her sexuality, that means that she will always be alone. that
Yeah.
because she rejects both Theo and Luke, like, she won't take either of them, so now she is just doomed to be alone forever because she hasn't been able to figure her stuff out because she is still repressed at the end of the movie.
Yeah, but if she says what she wants, why can't we be happy that she gets what she wants?
Does she want it, or does she just think she wants it? Has she been manipulated and gaslit by the house?
That is the gray area that is just I'm still trying to I need to watch this movie like 3 more times and write 10 more pages of notes. I think a lot of this conversation too does lead into the point of comparisons that we want to talk about between these
Yes.
2 films. I would argue that they are Gothic horror. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. But what is Gothic horror, Devin? What do you think Gothic horror means? What makes something Gothic horror? Or what makes it Gothic?
So Gothic horror is rooted in a literature movement and specifically like a social movement. My research, and I swear to God, this history lesson like does come back to horror movies. It kind of goes back to the conversation that we're having, and this is why it's so great that these films are filmed in the 1960s because when Gothic horror became popular, it was a result of what's it called? Not radicalizing, but pushing back against traditionalism. This
Mm,
traditionalism was in the early 1800s, so a very different kind of traditionalism, but one that led from the old stiffy ways of the Victorian era into the Romantic period and the Gothic horror period. And people saw this as more of an emotional period. We were talking more about our feelings, we were talking more about theories, which of course led more into these darker theories about death, life. We were talking a lot more about scientific theory than scientific fact. So it became more of a sharing of ideas of emotion rather than sharing ideas of the mind, I guess. And so with us more openly talking about, and I say us, this took place in England mostly, it opened up to more of the darker tones. Many people look at Frankenstein as being a perfect example of Gothic horror during this time. Other things that define Gothic horror obviously are ghosts. They're a big part of Gothic horror. A lot of it are these manor homes that we tend to see,
yep.
these basically abandoned Victorian homes, and exploring of the history that took place there. And we see it a lot of as a battle between modern theory as well as traditionalism is seen as a common theme throughout Gothic horror, as well as unrequited love, etc. I don't
Yes.
wanna go on forever, but I have a lot more to say about it, but I wanna give you the opportunity to jump in here so I don't talk for, like, 10 minutes.
You've thought way more about this than me and have like a much better answer and a much more thorough answer. I was just gonna be like, oh, it's all about location.
Well, I mean, that's a big part of it, though. It is. One of the things that I discovered while doing research, because Gothic horror to me was, like, always a vibe, and I was like, "I actually don't know the history of Gothic horror and what makes
Yeah,
something Gothic."
that's kind of where I'm at.
So I did a lot of the research, and, like, something else that kept coming up in the research too was, Gothic horror was also this discussion of classism. And why
Mm,
this feeds into place is because of what I said of the abandoned Victorian home or the old crumbling
hmm.
Victorian home representing an older way of life. That's what happened when people started moving to the cities. People started to really have these intense class struggles. It's a conversation of looking at the wealthy and being like, "Wait, what the fuck? You have such a different lifestyle than us of this lower class, this working class."
It's always all of these houses, because when I say
Yeah.
location, it is this specific location of this like old Victorian mansion. And these were always owned by extremely wealthy people and held up by like dozens of servants and maids and cooks and caretakers. They often would have someone else taking care of their kids essentially and raising their kids. Like that was part of it. And you have the other examples of it. You have movies and books like Rebecca or Jane Eyre, where it's a
Mhm.
poor woman gets to experience the fantasy of marrying some extremely wealthy man and then uncovering all of these skeletons in his closet. In Rebecca, it's Rebecca is not the name of the main character, it's the name of his previous wife, who was the most perfect person you could ever imagine that she will never live up to as some lower class trash. In Jane Eyre, she finds out that he also had a former wife, it's always the former wife, who was an insane woman that is now kept in his attic.
Mhm.
Spoilers for a like 200-year-old book that you read in high school.
I completely forgot the ending of Jane Eyre, and now I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's why I loved it so much." Or in the case of The Innocents, Miss Giddens experiencing this lavish way of life and seeing these children grow up in a way that she never had the privilege of doing. It is a
Yeah.
full discussion of privilege, right? How could these children, with so much that they're given, be acting the way that they do?
Or in The Haunting, when Nell dreams of someday having a house that has was it lion statues that she wanted?
Yeah.
And then she talks about how, like, "Well, I just have, like, little figurines of lions on my mantle is all that she can have." And even if you wanna go back to the parallels with her and Abigail Crane's companion, that was also someone who we forgot to mention that part in the queer coding, that there's also a read that Abigail Crane and her unnamed companion, they call her a companion, not a caretaker, a companion. So that
Which
also.
but that was actually a job back then. I mean, it happens in Rebecca as well.
But in Rebecca is also queer coded.
Yes, that was also queer coded, but, like, I think there's also a reading there that's like, these women are living in, like, a patriarchal society where everything that they have relies on the company of a man. Literally, they can't own fucking property, that, like, when their husband dies or when their family, such as their father, like Hugh Crane, dies, they are literally nothing because this is the world that we have built, and all that they get is the company of another woman, which, like, yes, sometimes they were relationships sexually, sometimes not. Anyway, back to yes. So, yeah, I think Nell and Giddens, they have this guilt a little bit, or they feel guilty of wanting those things that are considered materialistic, right? That are coming with a
Yes.
different class. Like, they feel bad that, like, even though we talk about how the world needs to move on and how we need to modernize society, and I'm going to say the 1% of the time back then were representations of traditional society that we want to revolt against. They do feel guilty for wanting something from that time period, such as
Yeah.
the money to afford these statues.
And again, since we referenced Jane Eyre and Rebecca, where the woman marries the super wealthy man, I think both The Innocents and The Haunting kind of flirt with that to some extent.
Totally.
With The Innocents, she also comes to this super amazing mansion and she's just like, oh my god, it's so much bigger than I thought it was. But she's not marrying into it. She is just there, unless you want to read it as a pedophilia metaphor, and then and then with The Haunting, you have, like Luke is probably the more traditional Mr. Rochester type figure that he's set to inherit, and he's flirting with her, but she rejects him. She is flirting with Dr. Markaway, who, while he doesn't literally own the house, is kind of in charge of the house right now. So it is still this flirtation with the authority figure who will be in charge of this beautiful place that you can stay here forever. And that is
Mhm.
her reasoning, is that she wants to stay here forever. So
Yeah.
both of these movies do have that lower class woman wanting to ascend, sort of.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned the doctor, and something I found interesting about his character in terms of classism as well is, like, he says he comes from money, right? He describes his
Yeah, of
family
course
as
he
a
does.
respectable English family that dragged, quote, all the Victorian virtues into the 20th century. And he says that he revolted against those ideas and moved to America. Interesting point. He moved from England to America.
Wow. Good catch. For those not sure, then The Haunting is set in, I think, in Connecticut or Massachusetts. It's just in New England. So, that whole region of America, the Stephen King region.
The region where there's actually older houses.
It's interesting because The Haunting is set in America instead of England. It's also, the house is not as old as I assume Bly Manor is. It was only built 90 years ago, and it may
Mhm.
stand for 90 more. Even, I mean, we talked about the idea that Luke is Mr. Rochester, Dr. Markway is Mr. Rochester, but you could even argue the house itself is Mr. Rochester
Right.
because the movie kind of plays with the idea that the house is alive? Question mark.
Yeah. Are these movies haunted house movies? Are these movies ghost stories? Like,
Hmm.
I feel like there could be a debate, as you said, is the house alive? Are the ghosts in The Innocents real? What were your pickups on for both of these?
In The Innocents, we actually see ghosts. Now, you can
Mhm.
still say that they're not real if you want to. Like, the movie is very much from Miss Ginn's perspective. I think she's in every scene. We're always with her. The camera is always with her. It is possible to read them as being figments of her imagination. Whereas in The Haunting, we never see any ghosts. And, like, in The Innocents, the ghosts are named, they're given backstories. In The Haunting, We're given a lot of history about the house, but there is never actually specified who might be haunting. The closest we get is the dog.
And I don't think they actually say do they say the word ghost at any point in The Haunting? Because they
They
very
do.
much say, like okay. But they do say, yeah, the house is alive, the house is bad. It's like the house.
And the sounds that they hear, they don't sound like ghosts the way we think of them. It's not like a person walking around. It is like thunderous. It like are these footsteps? It's like bang, bang, bang. It is
Yeah,
way
but
louder.
there are voices though, and I guess there is the moment
There
where
are
Nell
voices. Yeah.
is holding a hand. So there are, like, these small moments, but none that you would traditionally think of as ghost moments.
We can ask who are the ghosts in the haunting, or we can ask, is it even ghosts or is it literally the house itself?
That's a question that is very much roots itself in Gothic horror. What do ghosts represent in these stories? And if you do look at the themes that Gothic horror tends to explore and the themes that we have talked about here today for both of these films, my argument would be that the ghosts do represent the past, being a traditional
Mm.
past slash the guilt for these two women, the repression from these two women. I think it's very much rooted in Nell and Giddens and their relationship with the world and their complicated feelings with it. I think
Yes,
they are
I agree
being
with that.
tortured by these feelings.
In The Innocents, there is the line when Giddens describes her childhood home. I think it's Miles who says, like, oh, there's no room for secrets in there, or something like that.
Yeah.
And there is kind of this idea that the larger house allows for secrets. What do you make of that?
I think it could also be like you having space to be by yourself in your own thoughts. I mean, for now, it's literally having space at all to be able to do anything on her own and to discover who she is and like make choices on her own and not relying on anybody else. But I feel like the same could be said of Giddens in that she becomes the lady of the house. She has control, she makes the choices, and now she has to face the consequences of the choices that she makes because they're her own and they're not anybody else. They're not her mom's, they're not her older brothers, they're not her employers. They're the ones that she made.
She made choices. It led to a child's death. This is not going to end well for her. Yeah.
It's that space, right? There's that quote that Mrs. Gross says, "In the dark, these rooms get bigger." It's scary because it's like, yeah, when you're sitting there in the dark by yourself, there's nothing else to do but to think about. Really, to think about the past is usually where most people's heads go.
And not just the past of the house, though. I think it is also the secrets of the people. How Jessel and Quint would hook up in the house and they wouldn't even close the doors. The house is so big, so they say that the large house allows you for secrets, but everybody knew about this.
Right.
Was that a secret? It was an open secret.
It's one that they try keeping from Gideon, so it becomes a secret.
That's true. It makes sense literally that like in my small apartment, if someone's hooking up in my small apartment, then we all know that. There are
Yeah.
3 rooms here. But in a big mansion, even if the servants are all there, you can like walk through and no one can see you. There is
Yeah.
room to hide a ghost in these walls.
Exactly. And what is a secret but something that you are hiding, right? And
Hmm.
something that either has happened or has been thought or has been said, has being the word here of it being in the past and you hiding it from the present or from the future.
In Jane Eyre, the secret is the former Mrs. Rochester, who is literally still in the house, and she is not aware of it. So there you
This
go.
is David spoiling Jane Eyre for everybody in the world.
You all know what happens in Jane Eyre now. You're welcome.
Go read it. Funny enough, I'm reading a book about haunted houses, like, as we were talking about doing this
Perfect.
episode. So I'm reading Ghostland: in American History in Haunted Places by Colin Dickey, and he touches a lot on specifically the haunting of Hill House. But he has this amazing quote that I wanted to read to you about what he believes ghosts are. "We tell ourselves stories in order to live," Joan Didion once wrote, "and that is just as true of ghost stories, which tell stories of the dead as a way of making sense of the living. More than just
Mm.
simple urban legends and campfire tales, ghost stories reveal the contours of our anxieties, the nature of our collective fears and desires, the things we can't talk about in any other way, the past we're most afraid to speak of out loud and in the bright light of the day, and in the same past, that tends to linger in the ghost stories we whisper in the dark. I just felt like that was such a perfect summation of everything that we were talking about in terms of like the ghost stories.
It is. I like it. So with that note, I think I have one more question, and it's just kind of flat out, but it can be a discussion. In both of these movies, in The Haunting and The Innocents, literally, are the ghosts real?
Okay, for the innocents first, I don't want to have an answer for it, which I know is a cop out. But what I loved most about this movie is that there is doubt there, that we don't get that resolution. I don't think there are truly ghosts in the innocents, but it's more fun to have doubt there because it's mostly through her point of view. I think they more are a symbol and representing her current issues with her life, but it is so much more fun if there are actually ghosts. But there's nothing really there to prove that there are ghosts other than she sees them.
I definitely remembered this movie being a lot less ambiguous. I think just like, yeah, there were ghosts in that movie. We literally saw them. But I'm with you in that on rewatching it, I don't think there are any ghosts. I
Yeah.
like no one else ever really sees them. There's that moment when we think Flora sees Miss Jessel, but then Miss Giddens asks Flora, like, do you see someone there? And Flora just like kind of gives her this look, which you can read as like, oh, you see it too, or it can be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And then she's just like, "Oh, Flora definitely saw it too." It's like, well, she didn't actually say that though. And even like Miss Giddens wants to make it a big thing when she's like, "Oh, but how would I describe the ghost I saw and you knew who I was talking about?" And then Mrs. Gross very correctly points out, "You literally just saw his picture, dude." Like
Yeah, we don't see him until after. She gives the ghost a face, and before it didn't have one.
she saw a man in the tower. She saw
Mm.
a strange woman walking the halls out like the corner of her eye. She didn't see any faces clearly until after she knows. We never even actually know if what she's seeing as Miss Jessel is the correct image of Miss Jessel. I don't think she saw
That's
a
true.
picture of him, but I also don't think she describes what Miss Jessel looks like.
And actually, we don't even fully get Miss Jessel's face. We also just see a
That's
figure
true.
from far away, so we don't get those details. It's this thing of, like, Miss Giddens has a theory, and she takes bits of reality in order to prove her theory, and she's just, like, reading reality differently than everybody else so that she can reinstate her theory. She's a lot like Donald Trump in that way.
I will say the one thing that I think is probably the most significant evidence that there are ghosts, which we definitely have to address, is that before Miles dies, he does shout out Peter Quint.
Yes.
So that could suggest that he has been seeing Peter Quint. It could also suggest that he knows what she wants him to say and just says it. He also does
Right.
die, and we're not given like a clear reason for his death. There are definitely ways
That's
to read
true.
this.
That's true.
But also, can we rely on what we're seeing in these moments? Like,
That was gonna be my thing too. It's like at the end, the only 2 people left in the house are Giddens and Miles, and as you said, everything is from Giddens' point of view. So however we read that scene is gonna be from her POV, and how do we know that any of that is even real?
even the final time that we see Peter Quint standing and he like holds up his hand, like, I shall now release Miles and let him die. Then it cuts and we realize that it was a statue, that there was a
Yeah.
statue there. This movie's very clever in its ambiguity.
Okay, so what are your reads on The Haunting?
Oh, in The Haunting, it's real.
Mm.
I think in The Haunting, it's real. What do you think?
There's a theory that I think is fun, but is very hard to prove that the story is not real, that there is no Hugh Crane, that things were planted
Oh,
in the house.
oh.
Specifically stemming from the doctor tells Nell, "Don't stop in the town, don't talk to anybody else around this." The first person to bring up Hill House is the housekeeper. But who's to say she isn't, hired from the doctor to create this to study the paranormal? You need a ghost story. Who's to say he didn't come up with a ghost story about this house in order to
Hmm.
to feed his experiment? And Mrs. Danvers, every time, she brings Nell to her room and she tells her the ghost story, and then Theo, she tells her the ghost story. So she is implanting this idea in their heads from night 1. The theory falls apart a little bit, but it's a theory.
Yeah, the problem for me is that they all experience stuff to some extent,
Yes.
that they're all seeing shit. even Grace. Like, I think that there's too many things that are hard to explain if there's nothing going on. So it's funny because in The Haunting, you don't see the ghost, so you think that it would be more ambiguous, but I feel like it's less.
I feel like there's still up until the end when you see the mark in the tree that is like, "Oh, shit, yeah, there was a crash here from the
Mm,
first story, so maybe the first story
yeah,
is
but that could be
real."
anything.
Yeah, that could be anything. I mean, the whole thing could be a fun house. Did you know actually when they were first doing a pass of the screenplay, they wanted everything to be not real, and that in the end, it's revealed that Eleanor is just in a madhouse? That was the
Oh,
first
that's so
pitch.
stupid.
Interesting enough, it came from the screenwriter's reading of The Haunting of Hill House, because I think the way that the house is described as there are no sharp corners, and he's like, "Oh, this is a
Mm.
very padded house. This is like, oh."
Oh,
Yeah.
hmm, interesting. Huh.
It would have sucked if it was all in her head. And Shirley Jackson was
Yeah.
like, "No, I don't that's not what this is. This is a ghost story. Like, it happened. Like, this is a fucking ghost story. These ghosts are real."
Because with the innocence, the ambiguity comes from the fact that no one else ever says that they're seeing ghosts. Mrs. Gross kind of goes along with Giddens to some extent, but even then, like, as Giddens gets deeper and deeper into it, Mrs. Gross eventually is like, yo, I didn't see anything, man. On the other hand, in The Haunting, all of them, even Luke and Grace, who are the most doubtful, wind up accepting that there are ghosts there, or that the house is alive, or whatever it is, that there is something supernatural.
If you trust them. Devil's advocate, if you trust that they're not hired hands for the doctor.
Fair. But the fact that in The Haunting we have the doubters come around, and in The Innocence we do not have the doubters come around,
Mhm.
because you also know me that I always want to read movies where it's real, where it's all real. So for me, it really takes a lot for me to be convinced. Like I think it's all in their head, and in The Innocence, I really like that pedophilia read. I think that holds up so well. That this is all her like making excuses to dance around her pedophilia. Not that she's like actually molesting Miles, but that she's like trying to explain away her attraction to him. Like, oh well, it's actually an adult who is possessing him. Is why I'm
Yeah.
attracted to him,
Uh-huh,
and we can
sure.
fix
Yeah,
that.
yep,
And we can
sure.
fix that. If he just admits that there's an adult inside of him, that then he can be a little child again.
Again, she's feeding her delusions. Like, it's just where the fuck does she come up with this stuff? We have no idea.
She makes so many logical leaps and bounds.
But to fully answer if I believe the haunting is real or not, I that was a devil's advocate theory that I threw out there because I thought it
Yeah.
was interesting, but no, I definitely think that place is haunted, for sure. I think we hit everything that I wanted to talk about, which is surprising because I
Same.
feel like there was so many things that we could talk about with both of these movies.
And there's so much more that we could. We could talk about these for hours and hours and hours. Is there anything else that you really need to get off your chest?
No, I mean, honestly, if there is more conversation to be had, I think people should like discuss with us over social media. Like, again,
Yeah,
always promoting
would love
that
that.
to continue these conversations. So hit us up on Twitter with your own theories and anything that like you shouted at us while you were listening to us in your headphones. Shout at us on Twitter and Instagram at Cadaver Dogs Pod and TikTok. We're on TikTok.
I do have one more thing that I'd like to get off my chest. It's you see this like weird hand that's pressing on me. I don't like it. It's kind of giving me the creeps. So I want to get rid of it. You see that?
David's David, I'm home alone. David, what are you doing? David.
It it's right there on my chest. I want to
David,
get it off.
I I don't know. Do I see it? Am I just feeding into your delusions? Oh my god, is it gonna haunt me now? Oh my god. Wait,
Yeah, we'll worry about that
are
later.
you oh,
Let's
are
just
you
do the
okay?
bone review. Now it's time for our ghost's favorite part of the show, the bone review section, where we review each movies on a scale of 1 to 4 bones with half bones in between. Starting us off this week is Devin Shepard with The Innocents.
All right, great. Let me just take a small sip of my whiskey here.
Nice whiskey. I want whiskey.
I know it seemed like it's raining outside, guys. To really set the mood of this podcast, it is raining. I have a million candles lit. My whole house is decked out like it's fucking Halloween. And we've been talking about Gothic horror all day. So I feel like whiskey was very fitting. All right, The Innocents. God damn, is this movie not fucking gorgeous? The cinematography in here is just like so beyond its time or to the start of its time. I don't even know. The shots, not only are they beautifully composed, but I think the direction of them are really amazing. I think the other strong point here is I mean, I said it before, but my favorite thing is the ambiguity. I love that we don't get told if this is real or not. I love that there still is that debate of whether or not It's in her head, and the fact that nobody else sees these ghosts. It's so unique of a ghost story in that the children are fucking killer in these performances. I really enjoyed them. I did really see them as kind of like debating with their maturity levels, and then I don't know, I really felt for them. I was a little bored, I guess is the wrong word to
Aw.
say, but I was taking out of it. I know there was just something that didn't fully click for me to give this a 4 bones, and I will have to rewatch it, I think, and we'll probably give it a higher grade, but I unfortunately cannot pinpoint what that was. And maybe it wasn't the performance and my dislike of Giddens and the fact that we don't get much about her character, so she is a
Mm,
hard one to follow throughout the film.
mm.
So, I'm gonna give this 3 bones.
Okay.
David, what were you thinking for The Innocents?
I can sympathize with Miss Giddens being a difficult protagonist to follow through no fault of Deborah Carr, kind of to the credit of Deborah Carr, actually. For those who are not familiar, by the way, I'm only barely familiar with her myself, but she was a very, very major star in her day. She had like 6 Oscar
Mhm.
nominations. She was a big deal. Deborah Carr was be like the Amy Adams of her day or whatever.
Ooh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, she's fantastic in this. Any difficulty in following her, I think, is intentional because she does make such drastic logical leaps and we don't know much about her. I really love this pedophilia read. I'm like so fascinated by it. I'm sorry. I think it makes so much sense and it just puts the entire movie in such a different light that I'm like, "Oh my god. You think you're supposed to be afraid of ghosts, but you should have been afraid of the protagonist all along." Yeah, it's such a gorgeous movie. There was a scene at some point where I thought I saw a ghost standing behind them, and I like kept fixating on it, and then I finally realized that it was literally a statue, just a statue in the garden that I was looking at through a window, and I'm like, "Oh my god, that's great." Like it looks so good. Beautiful movie. I love my black and white cinematography when it's at its best, which is definitely at its best. Everything you said to the movie's benefit as well. There was something else I wanted to say, but I can't think of what it was. The child actors are really good, which is like shockingly good. Oh man, this movie's fucking creepy. I love it. I'm gonna give it 3.5 bones because I think
Mm.
this movie is perfectly splendid.
I will probably give that on my second viewing. I'm excited. This is my first time seeing it, so
Oh really?
yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, I thought it was a rewatch for you. Cool.
No, I've never seen The Innocents, but I have seen The Haunting before, which I have a very special place in my heart because I'm a huge original West Side Story fan, and Russ Tamblyn was, like, one of the first people I had a crush on when I was little. So that's why I discovered The Haunting, because Russ Tamblyn was in it. I don't know why. This is an anecdote that is only fun for me, but Amber Tamblyn lives a couple blocks from me, and we go to the same coffee shop, and I love her separately, but then I have the days where, like, I run into her and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, and, like, I used to have a big crush on your dad," is what I think. I obviously don't say that to her, but
You should
I'd
say
never
that to
talk to
her.
her. I wanted to say that to her. He's so old.
Is he still alive?
Anyway, he's still alive.
There's a chance.
There's a chance. And he probably visits her when he's a couple blocks from me. Oh my god. Oh my god.
Oh my
This week on Devin's weird crushes from cinema.
I feel like this one's a little more traditionally attractive, I think, than the guys that you usually go for.
Anyway, my bone review.
It's more like a bone review.
Oh god. Oh, David. Full chuds right now for Russ Tamblyn. And his however the fuck old he is, which is probably 98. Anyway, where I was with that was like, I have a special place in my heart for this movie. I find it creepy. I find it thrilling. I find it engaging. It is the characters are so well rounded to me in a way that like they're all fun and they're all very different. And it very much like it screams literature, but in a way where I think it does a brilliant job of adapting the original story, which is so hard to do. It's creepy. It brings all these like debates to the forefront, which is really exciting for me. Yeah, the writing's good. A lot of these shots in here also like created a lot of classic ghost stories, like the breathing door. Obviously inspired the Haunted Mansion, which I am a huge fan of the
Hmm,
ride. So that is always a fun thing for me. Anyway, I gave most of my time to Russ Tamblyn, so I'm gonna go ahead and give this 3.5 bones.
nice.
David, please hit me with your non-boner review of The Haunting.
You don't know me. I'm
David, you're
very
too wholesome.
How dare you? No, yeah, Theo is fucking hot, and it's a shame that she is, most likely a lesbian. No, really though. I love this movie. I talked even last month about how much I love this movie. Both of these were rewatches for me, but it had been a while, so it is very fun to revisit them with fresh eyes as an older person who is able to appreciate more of the subtleties and symbolism and also the campiness. This movie is it's not like campy, but there's definitely like a fair amount of 60s camp just like in all the playful banter between all the characters. It's really fun. I love listening to characters talk in these, but like in The Haunting there is so much just like witty rebuttal after witty rebuttal, and I'm just like, no one talks like this. I love it. It's great. But it's also like really fucking creepy. Like I know that a lot of people like want to be tough and are like, oh, I'm not affected by old horror movies. I think this movie is much scarier than most movies that come out today. I had fucking goosebumps at the end. I'm like, this is great. I'm into it. So with apologies to Alison Broder, I am going to
I
give
was
this
gonna
three and a
say,
half 3.5 bones.
you directly shot out at Allison. Much love to Allison.
Yeah, much love to Allison. We very much disagree about which Haunting movie is better because the 1991 movie is absolutely horrible and bad, but the Mike Flanagan one is fantastic.
I love all of them very much.
But which one's better?
They're all different.
Between 63 and 99, which one's better?
The 99 one also holds a special place in my heart because it was the one that gave me nightmares more than any other film. Oh my
Really?
god. Yeah. I
Okay.
couldn't stand near a fireplace for, like, 2 years.
3.5 bones for The Haunting, 1963. Amazing, fantastic movie, masterpiece. Love it. Yeah, these movies are great, and I can't wait to revisit them again in the future and see if my readings change again.
Long live spooky season. We're in the fall now.
I feel like this is a Halloween episode.
It is our Halloween episode, essentially. Thank you, all the listeners, for sticking with us for this long. This one was a little long, but we had so much to say. It was so much fun.
I can't wait to watch Mike Flanagan's new Gothic horror show about Edgar Allan Poe. I'm gonna watch that like right now when we stop recording.
Same, same. Well, I'm going to wrap us up. We are Cadaver Dogs, and we'll see you later, Mutts.
Peace. In the night, in the dark,